You find it on the railing one morning. Small, something shiny, a flattened bottle cap, or a piece of foil twisted into an irregular shape, or a fragment of wire bent at an odd angle. It wasn't there the night before. No one in the house put it there. And when you look up, there's a crow watching you from the fence post at the edge of the yard. Not moving, not calling, just watching to see what you do next. Most people pick up the object, turn it over in their hands, look around for an explanation that doesn't involve the bird, and eventually decide it was probably the wind, or a coincidence, or something a child left behind. They throw it away. They go inside. The crow watches all of this and files it away. What just happened in that yard is one of the most documented, most surprising, and most misunderstood behaviors in all of backyard bird research. A crow brought you something on purpose. The question most people never stop to ask is what it actually means when they do, and why almost everyone who receives one gets the interpretation completely wrong. If this is already making you look at the birds outside differently, hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps. And drop a comment telling me which birds visit your yard most often. I love knowing who I'm talking to. Crows are what researchers call facultative tool users. They don't just use tools when survival demands it. They interact with objects as a category, carrying them, testing them, modifying them, and sometimes placing them in specific locations for reasons that are not immediately obvious. In New Caledonian crows, the Oxford research is clear. Individual birds manufacture hooked tools from plant material, selecting raw materials based on structural properties, and carrying tools they won't need for several minutes to locations where they plan to use them. The North American crow in your backyard doesn't manufacture tools at that level, but it shares the same foundational cognitive architecture. Objects are not neutral to a crow. They carry information. They have uses. They can be given. The crow family that has established your yard as part of its territory, and if you've seen the same crow repeatedly over weeks or months, you almost certainly have a family group working that area, has been building what University of Washington researcher Dr. John Marzluff calls a reputation map of the humans in its range. You are on that map. The only question is how you're classified. When a crow brings an object and leaves it somewhere a specific human regularly appears, what most people assume is that it's random. A crow dropped something. Crows are messy. It's just trash the bird happened to carry and happened to leave. This interpretation is understandable. It matches the way we usually think about wildlife. Purposeless, instinct-driven, not directed at us specifically. We're used to being the observers, not the observed. What the research actually shows is something quite different. And it took years of careful documentation to establish because the behavior sounds, on first hearing, like exactly the kind of thing people project onto animals without scientific basis. Gabby Mann, a young girl in Seattle, began feeding crows in her yard with her family. Over time, the crows began leaving objects in the spot where she placed food. Researchers who documented the case identified consistent patterns, specific crows, specific locations, objects left reliably in the same spots where this particular human interacted with them. The objects were not random debris, they were carried there. Crow researcher Kaeli Swift, who has spent years studying corvid behavior including object gifting, has noted that while the behavior is not universal, when it occurs in the context of established, positive individual relationships between specific crows and specific humans, not feeders in general, not yards in general. You, specifically. The misreading goes deeper than just the "it was random" explanation, though. Some people who do recognize that a crow left them something on purpose interpret it as payment. The bird is trading. You gave it food, so it gave you something in return. This framing feels intuitive. It maps onto human economic logic and makes the behavior feel comprehensible without requiring you to believe anything too extraordinary about the bird's inner life. The trading interpretation is also wrong, and understanding why it's wrong is what changes how you see the behavior entirely. Crows do not give objects to humans because they have calculated an exchange rate. The objects they leave are not currency, and they are not chosen for their utility to you. A crow cannot know that humans find bottle caps interesting, or that a fragment of glass has any particular value. What the crow does know, in the way crows know things through observation, memory, and social inference, is that you are a safe, reliable, positive presence in its territory. And objects in corvid social life are not currency. They are social signals. In crow family groups, object sharing and transfer occurs most frequently in the context of pair bonding and parental behavior. Male crows bring food items to females. Adult crows bring food to fledglings. These transfers are not transactional. They are expressions of a specific social orientation toward another individual. The crow is not paying a debt. It is doing something closer to what, in a human context, we might call an offering. Not in a mystical sense, in a behavioral one. The object marks you as someone toward whom the crow has a specific social orientation, someone it has decided, after extended observation, to include in its sphere of positive regard. That distinction between payment and offering, between transaction and social signal, is the one that reframes the whole behavior. And it lands differently once you understand what the crow had to go through before it ever left anything on your railing. Before a crow brings you anything, it watches you. For a long time. Crow families are cautious in a way that their confident posture and loud vocalizations don't always suggest. They incorporate new elements into their environment, new humans, new behaviors, new yard changes, only after extended observation. Dr. Marzluff's research on crow habituation to specific humans documents a consistent sequence. First, the crow maintains maximum distance and watches. Then it begins allowing closer proximity while continuing to monitor. Then it begins approaching locations after you leave. Then it begins approaching while you're present. Each stage represents an update to its internal model of you. Are you safe? Are you consistent? Are you worth the risk of proximity? This process takes weeks, sometimes months. The crow on your fence post right now, the one you've been seeing every morning, is somewhere in that sequence. It has already decided something about you. The question is what? The science that explains object gifting in crows does not live in a single tidy study. It sits at the intersection of several research areas that have each independently produced findings that would have seemed implausible 30 years ago. Taken together, they describe a bird whose social and cognitive life is far more structured, far more intentional, and far more oriented toward specific individuals than most people ever consider when they're watching one pull apart a fast food bag in a parking lot. The first piece is individual recognition. Crows identify specific humans by face, by gait, by routine, and by behavioral profile. This is not a generalization, it is one of the most replicated findings in corvid research. The University of Washington mask studies established that crows not only recognize individual human faces, but transmit that recognition to other crows, including offspring who have never personally interacted with the recognized individual. Your face is known, your routine is mapped. The crow that leaves something on your railing has not confused you with your neighbor, it knows exactly who you are. The second piece is what researchers call pro-social behavior, actions that benefit another individual without a direct return benefit to the actor. For decades, pro-social behavior was considered a distinctly human trait, or at most a trait of species with complex mammalian social structures like primates and elephants. Corvid research has complicated that picture significantly. Crows in controlled studies will provide food to other crows who cannot access it themselves, even when they receive nothing in return, particularly when the recipient is a known individual from their own social group. The object gifting behavior fits within this broader pattern. It is not exchange, it is social investment in a specific relationship. The third piece is the crow's relationship to novelty and objects specifically. Crows cache food, they hide it in locations they select carefully, and they remember thousands of those locations across months. But they also interact with non-food objects in ways that go beyond foraging. Shiny objects attract crow attention in part because novelty does, and in part because the same visual processing that helps crows assess food quality makes them sensitive to reflective surfaces. When a crow carries a non-food object to a specific location where a specific human appears, it is engaging in a behavior that has no survival explanation unless you account for the social dimension. The object is not food, it has no caloric value. The crow brought it anyway, to a specific place for a specific individual, and then waited to observe the response. That last part matters more than almost anything else in this sequence. The crow waits, it watches what you do with what it left. Whether you pick it up, ignore it, throw it away, examine it, that response is data. The crow updates its model of you based on how you receive what it offered. This is not instinct. Instinct does not require feedback loops. What crows are doing with object gifting is closer to what developmental psychologists call social referencing, the behavior of checking another individual's response to gauge the meaning or safety of a situation. The crow gave you something and then watched your face. If you're finding this helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I upload new videos every week and I'd hate for you to miss one. Your support is what makes this channel possible, and it genuinely means the world to me. So what does this mean in practice for the specific behaviors you might be seeing in your yard right now? The first behavior to recognize is placement. When a crow leaves an object, it does not drop it randomly. Objects associated with gifting behavior are consistently left at locations that correspond to where the human regularly appears: the porch railing, the feeder post, the edge of the garden bed you stand near in the morning. If you found something small and out of place in a spot you frequent, and you've been consistently feeding or simply existing near crows in a calm way, the placement is not coincidental. The crow knows where you stand. The second behavior is the watch. After leaving an object, the crow stays visible. It doesn't immediately fly off to the next task. It positions itself somewhere with a clear sight line to the object and to you, and it observes. Most people don't notice this because they're focused on the object, not on the bird. But the crow that left something is almost always still nearby, watching what you do. If you acknowledge the object, pick it up, look toward the bird, speak calmly, that response is received and logged. If you ignore it or discard it without acknowledgement, that is logged too. The third behavior is escalation over time. Crow gifting, when it occurs in a genuine, ongoing relationship, tends to increase in frequency if the human responds positively and consistently. The initial object may be followed by others, left at the same location, sometimes on a regular schedule that corresponds to when you typically appear. Researchers who have documented multi-year crow relationships with specific humans note that the objects sometimes change in character, from random debris to items that appear more deliberately selected, smoother, more visually distinct. Whether crows are actually selecting for object quality is still debated. What is not debated is that the behavior, when it takes hold, compounds. The fourth behavior is vocalization shift. Crows in established positive relationships with specific humans change how they call in the presence of those individuals. The alarm calls and scolding vocalizations that crows direct at strangers or threats are replaced by softer, more varied sounds, lower in pitch, more conversational in rhythm. If the crow near your yard calls differently when you're outside than when your neighbor walks by, you are hearing the audible record of a social distinction the crow has made. You are not in the threat category. You are in a different category entirely, one that has its own acoustic signature. The fifth behavior is proximity tolerance that exceeds what you'd see with other humans. A crow that has decided you are safe will allow you to come substantially closer than it will allow an unfamiliar person. This is not tameness. Tame birds lose the weariness that keeps them alive. This is targeted trust. The crow is not less cautious in general. It is specifically less cautious around you, because its long observation of your behavior has produced a reliable prediction: you are not a threat. This distinction is important because it means the crow's tolerance of your proximity is a considered judgment, not a loss of survival instinct. The sixth behavior is what might be called social introduction. Crows in positive relationships with specific humans have been observed bringing other crows, offspring, mates, flock members, into proximity with those humans in ways that appear to signal safety. If a crow you've had a consistent relationship with suddenly appears with a juvenile crow and allows that juvenile to observe you from close range, you are almost certainly being introduced. The adult is doing for its offspring exactly what the University of Washington research documented in the mask studies, passing on information about a specific individual. In this case, the information being passed is, this one is safe. The seventh behavior is return precision. Crows with established yard relationships return on schedules that track yours, not theirs. They appear when you appear, in the places where you typically are. This is not coincidence, and it is not conditioned feeding response. It occurs even when no food is being offered, in contexts where the crow simply appears and watches. The crow has mapped your routine and orients to it. When you notice the same crow appearing every morning when you come out with your coffee, the crow has not learned when coffee happens. It has learned when you happen. All seven of these behaviors share a common structure. They are targeted, they are observational, and they compound over time. A crow that brings you something is not at the beginning of this sequence, it is well into it. The object on your railing is not an opening gesture, it is a marker of a relationship that the crow has already decided is worth investing in. You are receiving evidence of a conclusion the crow reached weeks or months before you even noticed. Now go back to that morning, the object on the railing, the crow on the fence post watching you. You picked it up, you turned it over. You looked at the crow, maybe for the first time with actual attention, not just the peripheral awareness we give to wildlife that isn't doing anything dramatic. The crow didn't move. It watched your face. And in that moment, without knowing any of this, you did something that the crow registered as significant. You looked back. You acknowledged what it left. You made eye contact, however briefly, with a bird that had been watching you for months and had finally decided you were worth the gesture. That crow wasn't waiting for food. It had already decided you weren't just a food source. What it was waiting for, in that moment on the fence post, was to find out if you were paying attention.